Detective Ed King finally got what he wanted. In May 1937, D.A. Burren Fitz impaneled a grand jury of 6 men. They were to investigate whether charges should be filed against Charlotte Shelby for the murder of William Desmond Taylor on February 1st, 1922. Sitting in the hearing room, King believed he would soon be placing handcuffs on Charlotte Shelby's wrists. There were just 3 witnesses slated to testify: Charlotte Shelby and her 2 daughters, Margaret and Mary. Margaret took the stand first. The eldest child of Charlotte Shelby, Margaret was now 37 years old. She spoke with steely determination. When asked the whereabouts of Charlotte Shelby on the night of the murder, her answer shocked the room. "My mother was not home the night that Mr. Taylor was killed. Mary left earlier that night and Mother went out after her. She feared she would run away with him." The him she referred to was Taylor. Mary had been obsessed with him since he had first directed her in a film 3 years before his death. Margaret went on to tell the jury that Mrs. Shelby and Mary had been feuding ever since another director, James Kirkwood, had impregnated Mary when she was only 15. Charlotte chased him away, and Mary had never forgiven her mother. King thought Margaret was a good witness, but both he and the DA were worried. They knew she had a serious drinking problem. Charlotte and Mary might bring that up, which would make Margaret appear unreliable in the eyes of the jury. As a cop, King had seen his share of drunks, and Margaret had the signs. Her eyes were intense and dark, but they darted and she blinked often. She kept her hands folded on her lap to hide that they were shaking. He held his breath as Margaret continued. She said when Mary returned home that night, she came into Margaret's room. "She got in bed with me," Margaret said. "She said Mother killed him." "Killed who?" the DA asked. You could hear a pin drop in the courtroom. Margaret didn't hesitate. "Mr. Taylor." The courtroom erupted into shocked murmurs. Mary took the stand next. She looked nothing like the blossoming ingenue of the silent screen. Now 35, the once petite actress had ballooned out considerably. She was almost unrecognizable, but her voice sounded the same. When Fitz asked Mary whether she believed Charlotte was guilty of killing Taylor, she spoke in her signature dramatic voice. "Charlotte Shelby is completely innocent of Mr. Taylor's murder. She had nothing whatsoever to do with it." But the final witness was the one King wanted to hear from, Charlotte Shelby herself. Now a matronly 60-year-old, she stared straight ahead as she walked to the front of the room, wearing a floral pink dress with ruffles and a black lace cloche hat. The outcome hinged almost entirely on what Charlotte would say today on the stand. While the DA presented the grand jury with the bullets King found at Shelby's former residence, bullets that were the same caliber as the murder weapon, the tests were inconclusive. They could not definitively match them to the gun that killed Taylor. On the stand, Charlotte looked confident and calm. She vehemently denied Margaret's charges, dismissing them as the rantings of an alcoholic. Her voice was credible and strong. King could see it in the eyes of the grand jury panel. He understood how she was the only person to get $1 million contract out of Adolf Zukor. But D.A. Fitz didn't let up. Where was she the night of the murder? "Home," she said, and then paused dramatically. "With company." She couldn't possibly have an alibi, thought King. Why would she keep it a secret for 15 years? "I was with the actor Carl Stockdale." Carl was also her loyal assistant. She continued, "If the police ask him, he will swear to it." King thought she was lying through her teeth, but his vote didn't count. It was now up to the panel. Foreman John Bauer stood up to speak. The jury was satisfied with the demeanor of the witnesses, all of whom appeared cooperative. The grand jury has no knowledge of anyone to call for more data at this time. However, the investigation is pending. King wasn't sure how to interpret that, other than he would not be putting handcuffs on Charlotte Shelby's wrists today. Or maybe ever. A week later, King went to see Carl Stockdale himself. The 63-year-old actor backed up Charlotte's story. "I was with Mrs. Shelby from 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. in her apartment at 7th Street and New Hampshire Avenue the night of the murder." King wanted to know why he hadn't come forward in all these years. "Because no one asked," was his answer. A few days later, District Attorney Fitz called King to tell him they were taking the case off of active status. The investigation into the murder of William Desmond Taylor was officially done. Detective Ed King never worked the Taylor case again, but he went to his grave believing he knew who was guilty: Charlotte Shelby.
We get support from Believe Her, a new true crime podcast from Lemonada and Spiegel and Grau. In September 2017, young mom Nikki Adamando shot and killed her partner, Chris Grover. She was sentenced to 19 years to life in prison for murder. Through rare access to police audio, a month-long trial, conversations with Nikki, and original reporting, journalist Justine Vanderloon lays out the killing, the evidence, and the aftermath. As this 6-part series unfolds, listeners will put together different pieces of a disturbing puzzle. One thing is clear: perception is not reality. Believe Her is a riveting chronicle that grapples with assumptions we make about domestic and sexual violence, the long reach of trauma, and the ways in which survival is criminalized, leaving us shocked at how far people will go to avoid seeing what's right in front of them. Believe Her premieres October 21st. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Wondery's shocking true crime podcast, Over My Dead Body, is back for a third season with a story about corruption, betrayal, and the secrets of a fallen hero. Follow Over My Dead Body, Season 3, Fox Lake, on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening right now.
From Wondery, I'm Tracy Patton, along with my co-host James Remar. This is Hollywood and Crime, Murder in Hollywoodland. On our last episode, director William Desmond Taylor spent the last 2 months before his death besieged by troubling events, and Detective King grew ever closer to bringing Charlotte Shelby in to face a grand jury. And now, with the case declared dead, Detective King had no choice but to give up. But 44 years after Taylor's death, an aging Hollywood legend is about to pick up where King left off, and new suspects emerge. This is Episode 6, The Confession.
King Vidor weaves his red T-Bird convertible in and out of the thick afternoon traffic on Sunset Boulevard. It's November 1966. The temperature in LA is 61 degrees, but the wide pancake of smog across the sky makes the air feel warmer. At a red light, 3 pretty young women wearing miniskirts and bright print shirts skip through the crosswalk, chattering without a care in the world. One of them looks towards Vidor. "Groovy car, mister." His spirits lift. As he drives south, he looks around the Sunset Strip. Instead of men in fedoras and button-down shirts, rowdy young guys with shaggy hair and Nehru jackets have taken over the street. It's the air of bohemians and rock musicians. Druggies, some old people call them. Vidor doesn't think they're so bad. Hell, he'd probably be right there with them if he was younger. A lot younger than his 71 years. His mind travels to the past when he was an aspiring director in the early days of Hollywood. The silent era had made plenty of noise back then. Parties, scandals, affairs, drugs, booze. He has a few stories to tell. But no one seems to want to listen anymore. 20 minutes later, Vidor pulls into Paramount Pictures studio off of Melrose Avenue and inches up to the gate. The security guard looks up from his clipboard. "Mr. Vidor, it's been too long. Are you working on a new movie?" King Vidor, writer, director, and producer of more than 60 films and 5-time Academy Award nominee, musters up a confident tone. "You bet." The guard's face lights up. "Glad to hear that, Mr. Vidor. I miss the old faces." "Go ahead." Vidor sighs. That's what he boils down to these days. One of the old faces. A relic. He parks his car and takes in the scenery. The studio lot has gone through a major transformation since his heyday in film. Vidor trudges toward the executive building, where each office door is emblazoned with the nameplate of another vice president. A secretary buzzes him into one of the VP suites. Vidor takes a deep breath and steps in. The exec is a kid, maybe late 20s. Hair still clipped short, but sideburns inching downward. "Come on in, Mr. Vidor. Have a seat. My parents are big fans of yours. You directed 2 of their favorite movies, Duel in the Sun and The Fountainhead." Vidor smiles amiably and clears his throat before speaking. His voice is too often craggy sounding these days. "Thanks. I appreciate it." The exec casually glances at his watch. "So, what do you have going on these days?" "I've got some great projects. One of them is called Cervantes, based on the life of Miguel de Cervantes, a fascinating character. He wrote Don Quixote." The young man sneaks a look at his watch again. "Yeah, we're trying to get away from costume flicks." Crap. He's not going to like Vidor's next idea either. "I'm also developing a romance based on a Nathaniel Hawthorne book, with a sinister twist." "Let me think about it," says the exec. But Vidor can tell he's lost him. "We'll be in touch," the VP smiles. Vidor walks back through the lot to his car. His feet hurt, but it's his ego that's bruised. The meeting was a bust. There's not going to be any callback. But he's got a drink with his name on it waiting for him at the Polo Lounge, along with a dear friend who'll make him feel better. 30 minutes later, he settles into a booth and waves at the waiter. "Bourbon on the rocks." He hears the voice of Colleen Moore before he sees her. "Good afternoon, Professor Latour." "Ah, Madame Zaza," he responds. Nicknames from long ago. She must have been 20. He was 24. A hungry silent screen actress and an ambitious director. Lovers for a time. Moore slips inside the booth. Now in her 60s, she's still got the spunk and exuberance that made her the original flapper of the Roaring Twenties. Now she lives in Chicago and is a successful financial analyst. The two lost track of each other for 40 years, but once they reunited, it was as if no time had passed. Creative juices started flowing, and they both had a lot of ideas. 3 years ago, they formed a partnership, Vidmore, to develop, write, and produce movies. So far, nothing is sold, but hope springs eternal, even when you're on the slippery side of the slope. Colleen orders a Chablis. It didn't go so great at Paramount. She can always tell, but she never lets the business get her down. "I have something. Do you remember that time we were in Paris?" Vidor's face softens. "Sure I do. We couldn't stop talking about William Desmond Taylor and his unsolved murder." Vidor never forgot their conversation or the case. Taylor's killing had blown apart Hollywood. He and Colleen were just starting their careers when it all happened. They both knew the director and all the suspects. He even worked with Taylor on a film. Colleen's on fire now, going on about the case. What if they reignite the project, turn it into a movie? King could write the screenplay. With all the twists and turns, it could be a big hit. Vidor isn't as sure. The story is old, and there's no Hollywood ending. If you're going to bring a successful whodunit to the big screen, you have to know who did it when the final curtain closes. But some of the players are still alive. He could do some digging into the case, and he can already see the possibilities. Michael Caine as Taylor, Betty Davis as Mrs. Shelby. Colleen grins. Let's do it. Maybe she's right. So many lives and careers were ruined because of the murder. So many skeletons strewn over the history of Hollywood. It's the kind of stuff you can't make up. Let me think about it. He takes a big gulp of his bourbon. If he decides to take this on, it will mean waking up the dead.
Margaret "Gibby" Gibson was in a jam. In the spring of 1917, the 23-year-old actress's career was running out of steam. She'd been in a string of low-budget pictures, but none were advancing her career or putting enough money in her coffers to make rent. It was still a mystery to Gibby how 2 short years ago, everything looked so rosy, and now she was pinching pennies. How did that happen? She had gotten her start at the Vitagraph Stock Company back in 1913. It was a short time later that a movie magazine described her as the youngest leading lady ever at the studio. She earned it after starring in 4 films in a row with William Desmond Taylor. They'd become pals, and then he'd gone on to become a big-time director. When they met, she was the one with the bright future. He even told her so. Why was Gibby the one left in the dust? She was just as pretty as Mary Pickford or Mary Miles Minter. In fact, a director had told her she was even prettier. It wasn't fair. Gibby had a successful 12-month run at In Studios after Vitagraph, but she couldn't land the breakthrough part. Still, she could see her future as a big star rolling out before her eyes. She would make good on the promise she made to her mother and buy her a mansion. But the big break never came. Oh, she had plenty of auditions, but the producers kept picking other girls, less talented and less pretty, the way Gibby saw it. Before she knew it, a year had gone by, and she was in debt up to her eyeballs and couldn't get a role to save her life. So she figured she'd belly up to the bar at a Hollywood watering hole to forget her troubles. But trouble found her. Sitting at the bar holding court was Joe Peppa, a low-rent drug smuggler whose claim to fame was having his arm shattered in 22 places by the cops during a bust. His arm was still in a sling, but he was dressed to the nines in a pinstripe suit and a full-length fur coat. And when Handsome Joe flashed his dreamy dark eyes at Gibby, she couldn't resist. They got on like gangbusters. By August, Gibby's finances hadn't improved, and Joe was sympathetic. "Baby, come on. Look, if you're worried about money, I got a little job you could do to get you through the tight spot. It'll be easy," he told her. "A few hours of work, lots of dough. Then she'd have money to buy all those pretty things she deserved." Gibby mulled it over. She didn't mind getting her hands a little dirty. Sometimes it was the only way to get what you wanted in this town. "Okay," she said. "I'm in." A few days later, Gibby made her way down a crowded block filled with street vendors in Little Tokyo, looking for a rooming house on Commercial Street. As she walked, the neighborhood got progressively more rough, mostly bathhouses and nightclubs. The area was known for its drug deals, robberies, and back alley stabbings. The dark underbelly of L.A. most Hollywood types avoided. Joe was there to greet her. He introduced her to a woman named Lila, who escorted Gibby upstairs and handed her a musty kimono to put on. Then she made her way down the dingy hall, entered a parlor, and joined a group of young women on a scratchy couch. They were dressed the same way. Gibby recognized another actress from her Vitagraph days and smiled. Guess times were tough all over. She knew what was coming. The door opened. A line of businessmen filed in and looked each girl over. She held her breath, almost hoping no one would notice her. Then she felt a hand on her shoulder. A short man with greasy skin and greasier hair leered at her. That was her cue. She got up to follow him. About 20 minutes later, it was over. Gibby was back in the sitting room to await her next customer when she suddenly heard a huge commotion at the door. "LAPD, everybody's under arrest!" The girls started screaming, but Gibby remained calm. She had a story ready. She approached one of the cops during the pandemonium. "Excuse me, sir. My name is Margaret Gibson." The cop glared. "What about it, lady?" Gibby raised her voice so she could be heard above the din. "I'm an actress, and I'm here to research my next movie. It's about the underworld, and I thought it would be beneficial to get some local color." The policeman smiled. "Well, ain't that interesting? Some color?" He roughly turns her around. "Get to the paddy wagon." Okay. Can I at least get out of this outfit?" He looked her up and down and sneered. "A robe ain't good enough for the picture actress?" Then he shrugged. "Go ahead." A few minutes later, she emerged in her street clothes. Another cop liked what he saw. He grabbed her and pushed her against the wall, kissing her hard on the mouth. "You're an unusually pretty girl to be found in such a place." Then he practically threw her into the back of the paddy wagon. Gibby had gotten herself into big trouble in Little Tokyo. But she was clever. She'd figure a way out.
On December 5th, 1966, King Vidor stands in the middle of the rubble at 404 Alvarado Court. Vidor saw an article in the Times that some bungalows were being torn down to make way for a strip mall. bungalows that were once home to famous movie people, including director William Desmond Taylor. He wants to be here before the past disappears. He remembers how snazzy Westlake was back in Taylor's day. Bougainvillea bushes and pepper trees gave the illusion of paradise in the middle of the city. Now it's a depressing pit of buildings, most of them vacant or boarded up, waiting for the wrecking ball. To Vider, the day feels like the end of an era, wiping away the home of a man whose work has also been pretty much lost to history. Vider was just 26 the year Taylor was killed. He remembers how much people admired the director. He was kind and generous in a town filled with people who preferred to look out for themselves. Now he's forgotten. The irony doesn't escape Vider. He's on the verge of being forgotten by the new generation too. But maybe for Vider there's a new beginning in this end. He's going to call Colleen Moore and tell her he's ready to try and make this picture. As Vider turns away, he spots something on the ground. It's one of the old doorknobs from the bungalows. He picks it up and rubs off some of the dirt. Then he slips the object into his pocket and walks back to his car. It's a sign. Vider needs to step through the door and see what's on the other side. Go back to the beginning.
Gibby Gibson walked into the courtroom dressed in a neatly pressed dark green suit. Her bouncy hair formed a halo beneath her smart black hat. It was September 15, 1917, a month since the cops arrested her on charges of vagrancy. Since then, she managed to secure the services of a high-powered attorney named Frank Dominguez, who had a reputation as one of the most entertaining political orators in the state. Thank God for Hollywood connections, Gibby thought, and her acting abilities. No one liked the threat of a scandal tarnishing Hollywood's image. So when she turned on the waterworks about the potential headlines ruining her career, people were only too happy to help. Now Dominguez just had to get her off. After settling onto the stand and demurely crossing her legs at the ankle, the young actress told the jury how she ended up here. Since I was 12 years old, I have been engaged in show business. That's when my father left my mother and I had to become the breadwinner to support her. Gibby pointed to her mother, who was seated in the courtroom weeping into her hanky. Dominguez could see the jury's looks of sympathy. So young to be given so much responsibility. Then the lawyer asked her about the aggressive cop. In a halting voice, she explained how terrified she was when he pushed her up against the wall and took advantage of her virtue. The courtroom appeared horrified. On September 19th, the jury took just 15 minutes to find Gibby Gibson not guilty. Gibby had a new lease on life. She vowed to succeed in her acting career and avoid the Joe Peppas of the world. But she needed a legitimate job, which meant making a bold move. She changed her stage name to Patricia Palmer and adjusted her age slightly south to 19. In 1919, Patricia got fresh headshots done and personally walked them into every contact she had in town. She even dropped one off at famous players Lasky, where she hoped her old pal Billy might see it. He'd no doubt recognize her. She returned home, positive she'd be getting the call that would change her life again.
King Vider can hear mice squealing as he roots through a stack of boxes in his basement. He had to move a lifetime worth of mementos when he lost his prestigious office on the MGM lot. Now buried somewhere in this mess is a file he'd started on William Desmond Taylor's murder nearly 3 years ago, after he and Colleen first talked about the idea in Paris. When he locates the box, he hauls it upstairs to his desk and places it next to a stack of articles he collected from the public library. Just a quick review of the facts makes his head spin. The yellow press was eager to sell papers whether stories were true or not. He'd forgotten how much truth and fiction had been blurred. There were stories about a pink nightgown found in Taylor's bedroom, exclusive sources who swore that Taylor was sleeping with Mabel Normand and Mary Miles Minter, and even her mother, Charlotte Shelby. One article claimed pornographic photos were found in Taylor's apartment. All of it was false. And now, with many of the characters long dead, will he be able to find out the truth? What will they remember? Vider hopes time is on his side. Since no one much remembers Taylor's murder, maybe someone will finally feel free to tell the truth about what they know. And he wants to start with the biggest actress of the silent screen, one of the few who made the transition to talkies, Miss Gloria Swanson. She knew Taylor personally, as well as many of the players. She might have valuable insight. But he'll have to leave Hollywood to do it. Miss Swanson lives in Manhattan now.
We get support from SimpliSafe. A home security system that's so complicated you just never use it isn't doing anybody any good. That is exactly the type of security system our sponsor, SimpliSafe, has spent a decade fighting against. And it's why they designed their system to be easy to use while protecting your home 24/7. Getting set up is simple. You order online with the click of a button, open the box, place the sensors, plug it in, and just like that, your home is protected around the clock. It was that easy for me, and I swear I'm sleeping better knowing my home is protected. Best of all, you don't need to pay any outrageous monthly fees or sign a 2-year contract. SimpliSafe was named Best Overall Home Security of 2020 by U.S. News & World Report. And their 24/7 professional monitoring and emergency dispatch starts at just 50 cents a day. Get started today. Head to simplysafe.com/Hollywoodland and get free shipping and a 60-day money-back guarantee. That's simplysafe.com/Hollywoodland to make sure they know that our show sent you. In the small town of Fox Lake, Illinois, Joe Glinowitz was a hometown hero and a 30-year veteran of the local police department. On September 1st, 2015, just 1 month from retirement, he was found dead outside of an abandoned cement plant, shot in the chest twice at close range. While the town and Joe's family mourned his passing, hundreds of police officers launched a manhunt to find his killer. After weeks of searching, the lead investigator discovered chilling secrets about Joe, the local police department, and the village of Fox Lake. Secrets that, once uncovered, would put the town in the national spotlight and haunt them for years to come. Wondery's shocking true crime podcast, Over My Dead Body, is back for a 3rd season with a story about corruption, betrayal, and the secrets of a fallen hero. Follow Over My Dead Body Season 3 Fox Lake on Apple Podcasts, or you can listen early and ad-free by subscribing to Wondery Plus in Apple Podcasts or the Wondery app. By early 1920, Gibby Gibson had worn out her shoes, traipsing around town, peddling her headshots and her new name and going on general casting calls. The response had been tepid at best. So much for her contacts. No one came through with as much as an audition. Not even a peep from her old friend William Desmond Taylor. How could so many people who once knew her well have completely forgotten her? She needed to shake it off. It was just a minor setback on her path to resurrect her movie career. She had a new plan now, and fellow actor and aspiring director Don Osborne was part of it. She first met Don on the set of a low-budget picture called The Tempest. She liked him immediately. The handsome actor was a lean 6'3" with dark, slicked-back hair and a very fashionable pencil mustache. They quickly started a romance. So what if he had an estranged wife stashed somewhere in town? He had ambition, and that's what really counted. Now Osborne lived in the Wallace Apartments in downtown L.A. It wasn't far from the studios, but it was miles away in class. In addition to Osborne, the building was home to hookers and dealers. It wasn't where Gibby expected to take a meeting, but she had to start her comeback somewhere. As Gibby settled onto the bed, Dawn shouted out a rallying cry. "We deserve to be successful! The high-class, big-shot sons of bitches running the studio shouldn't get to keep the little guy down, am I right?" Gibby nodded vigorously. It was their turn to make it big. Don wanted to make his own independent movie, but it was hard to get small pictures off the ground. The studios controlled everything that got made and the theaters where they played. But Don had a plan. The key, he said, was to team up with independent producers and make a film so good that the big studios would have to pay attention. If the public clamored to see it, even Adolf Zukor would have no choice but to show it. He was going to write and direct it, and Gibby, nay Patricia Palmer, would star. Really, how hard could it be to make a film themselves? All they needed was some seed money.
King Vidor looks in the mirror and adjusts his tie and wonders if he should wear his fedora hat. Gloria Swanson has invited him to her Manhattan apartment to talk about the William Desmond Taylor case, and he can't help but be a little nervous. It's as if the Queen of Hollywood has summoned him. It doesn't matter that her reign in the kingdom has been over for almost 4 decades. King Vidor? The voice on the other end sounds familiar. A ghost from the past. It's Tony Moreno. Vidor sits on the edge of his bed. Antonio Moreno is the actor who talked to Taylor on the night of the murder by phone, just as Mabel Normand arrived for a visit. Moreno tells Vidor he heard the director was writing a picture about Taylor. He wants to know if Vidor thinks it's such a good idea to dredge up the past. Vidor asks how Moreno found him, but Moreno skirts the question. "I'd think twice about this if I were you." Is this a threat? Does Moreno know something about what happened? Moreno tries again. "There are people alive from the old days, and not all of them want the truth to come out." "Like who?" Vidor asks. "What truth?" But Moreno hangs up, leaving Vidor in the dark and wondering what sort of hornet's nest he's stirred up. Gloria Swanson greets King Vidor at the door of her luxurious Fifth Avenue penthouse. She's 67 years old, but Swanson still radiates movie star. Her big blue eyes are sharp beneath her famous penciled brows. Her legendary cheekbones are angled as ever and her lips are blood red. To Vidor, she is the definition of the golden age of Hollywood. She invites Vidor into her expanse of a living room, decorated with museum-worthy French antique furniture. 3 massive windows look out over the bright lights of the city. Swanson sits across from Vidor in a green velvet chair, her long, delicate arm casually draped over an armrest. Vidor has to laugh. Swanson is nothing like her famed character, Norma Desmond, the out-of-touch, out-of-her-mind, aging movie star she plays in Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard. Vidor wonders how many people even know the movie was in part inspired by the Taylor case. The name Norma Desmond is a combination of Mabel Normand and William Desmond Taylor. Of course, Swanson knew them both. It's about time someone told that story, or at least as much of the story as anyone knows to tell. Her intense eyes drill into him. "You know, I always got the feeling the studio played a role in shutting down parts of the investigation, like they were trying to plug a leaky boat. Just when one scandal got sealed up, there'd be another." Vidor remembers those days when men like Adolf Zukor ran their empires as benevolent dictators. Vidor likes the studio angle. It will add a good layer of intrigue to the script. but Swanson can't give him anything specific. He asks, "Is there anyone else I should talk to? What about Douglas McLean? He lived next door and was one of the first people at the scene of the crime." Swanson says he's still alive and living in L.A. "Oh, and there's Tony Moreno. He and Taylor were good friends. He's still in L.A., I think." Veeder decides not to mention the call he got from Moreno earlier. "What about Edna Proviance?" "Dead," Gloria says. "Poor thing had throat cancer." "Faith McLean?" "Dead." "Arthur Hoyt?" "Deader than dead." "Well," she says, "at least we're still here. For now, at least." Veeder gets up to leave and tips his hat, feeling his age and then some. Swanson asks if he thinks he'll solve the case. Veeder tells her the truth. It's a long shot. Swanson says, "Making a comeback always is. Can I give you a piece of advice? Shoot. You'll need a killer ending."
Gibby had been scoping out a traveling salesman at the Melrose Hotel for 2 days straight. He looked like the perfect mark. She picked up the phone to call Don Osborne. Then she took a seat near the front desk and waited. Her acting career was still in the deep freeze, and she needed some way to bring in dough. Osborne still had writer's block, but in the meantime, he came up with a scam that was almost a steady job. Now, Gibby just had to watch it all unfold. A half hour later, Osborne showed up with the sexy Rose Putnam. Rose was his niece, and actually a few years older than Osborne. This wouldn't have been all that strange if it wasn't for the fact that Osborne and Rose were now an item. Personally, Gibby didn't think much of Rose, but Osborne was mesmerized by her. She had her uses, though. She was good at flashing her smile and showing a little leg. Gibby and Osborne watched from afar as Rose walked up to their mark and casually began to flirt with him. After a while, Rose and the man went upstairs to his room. 10 minutes later, Rose ran out of the lobby elevator, her face a mess of tears and anguish. The man she seduced was right behind her with a bewildered look on his face. The poor sap. Now it was Osborne's turn. He leapt into action, playing the part of her jealous husband. The 6'3" Osborne leaned over the out-of-town salesman. "How dare you take advantage of my wife? I'm going to call the police." Gibby judged his performance a bit hammy, but the salesman bought it. He pleaded with Osborne not to call the cops. After some negotiation, they agreed on a price. The salesman wrote a check for their silence. Gibby, Rose, and Osborne split the proceeds, with Gibby getting an extra cut for setting the whole thing in motion. They left the Melrose Hotel feeling fat and accomplished. It was the easiest payday she'd had in years. Gibby sat on the backyard steps of Don Osborne's rented house on South Bronson Avenue in the Hollywood Hills, wanting to cry. She still didn't understand why she couldn't get decent acting work. She had followed the rules, and here she was sitting around with a bunch of nobodies on the outside looking in. A man came out and sat on the back steps next to her. She'd seen him around the past couple of weeks, but didn't know his name. He was heavy-set and older than most of the group. There was a twisted look in his dark eyes, and he had a large nose and rough look. A real tough guy. "You should be in the movies with that face," Gibby puffed up with disdain. "I'm a seasoned actress, and I've been in movies for 10 years. I've worked with some very important people." "So why are you hanging around with these losers?" he asked. It was a good question. "I've had some minor setbacks." She hoped her tone would put him in his place. Just then, Don Osborne stumbled out of the house and almost fell down beside her. He was drunk. "Gibby, allow me to introduce you to Blackie Madsen. Blackie thinks we're rinky-dink. He says we need to go after bigger fish." Gibby laughed. "No offense, Mr. Blackie, but you look as broke as the rest of us." Blackie laughed back, a deep, cynical, scary laugh. Then he pulled a revolver out of his pocket. "I always keep good company with my friend here, Mr. 38 Special. Sometimes it gets you what you want." Gibby shifted uncomfortably, and Blackie read her like a book. "It's just in case, sweetheart." Osborne hiccuped. "You're the key, baby doll." He turned to Blackie. "She's got contacts and high-class friends." Blackie stared at her intently. "Well, why don't you just make a list of your top high-class friends? Maybe we'll catch us some rich fish." Gibby blanched. She needed those contacts for her acting career. It was Osborne's turn to laugh. "What have they ever done for you?" Gibby couldn't disagree, even if she wanted to. In July of 1923, Gibby pulled up to La Grande Station to pick up her very important cargo. She spotted them across the busy sidewalk. What an odd pair, she thought. Blackie Madsen and Don Osborne. She waved them over to her cheap roadster. The two men tossed their luggage inside and hopped in. Osborne laughed. "Let's get the hell out of here and get a drink. We got some cash to spend." "How much?" Gibby asked. Osborne showed her a fat roll of hundreds. Gibby whistled. Blackie pipes up. "There's more where it came from, too." Since Blackie joined their inner circle, there had been a definite uptick in her finances. Using her contacts was paying off. They'd run scams on some of the studio people and a few wealthy bankers. Rose was always a willing lure, but the payback was 3 times better. This time they had hit the mother lode with a big-time banker from Ohio named John Bushnell, whose daddy had been the governor. Rose had been the banker's mistress for a while now. For their last tryst, they'd met in New Orleans. Bushnell didn't realize it was illegal to transport a woman across state lines for sex and whatnot, and he was stupid enough to put his longing into letters for Rose. What a sap. Osborne and Blackie had shown up at Bushnell's fancy office in Ohio. Osborne posed as Rose's concerned brother, and Blackie played a fake FBI agent. They told him his trip to New Orleans with Rose was a violation of the Mann Act. The banker nearly fainted. They put the screws to him, and Bushnell wrote them a check for 10 G's. Their biggest score ever. What a world.
King Vidor heads up South Orange Drive toward the duplex of Claire Windsor. A fashion trendsetter and leading lady in silent pictures, Claire was another one of the lucky few to successfully make the transition to talkies. Vidor directed her 40 years ago in a movie called Show People at MGM. The actress left the limelight to become an artist, but back in 1922, Claire was with Taylor just 4 nights before his murder. When Vidor arrives, she gives him a warm hug. She is still gorgeous with luminous blue eyes and that patrician face that got her cast as the upscale socialite in most of her movies. As she leads Vidor to her living room, he admires the original oils lining the walls and ceramics on shelves jostling for position with her old black and white glossies. She was a looker, all right. So, dear King, I heard about your project. I know you want to know about the night I was with Taylor. Vidor nods. It was an odd night. How so, Vidor asks. She tells him they went to a dance performance at the Coconut Grove. Claire was Taylor's date, and his friend Tony Moreno brought a lady too. She said the director was extremely reserved. It was odd, King. His mind seemed 1,000 miles away, and that wasn't like him. At one point, I did ask him about the burglary at his house. You know, that whole valet mess? Vidor remembers. It was in the reports that his valet had stolen money and jewelry and crashed Taylor's car. Claire went on. He got this faraway look and said, if I ever lay my hands on Sands, I will kill him. Later that evening, she noticed Taylor seemed nervous and haggard. Vidor wonders what was on Taylor's mind that night so long ago. He asks Claire if she recalls anything else. Well, I just remember he and Tony huddling a lot, whispering. Then they took off at the same time. I got a ride home with someone else. It's clear Vidor needs to talk to Tony again, and this time get some answers. The phone call from him when he was back in New York was suddenly taking on a whole new light. The next morning, Vidor digs up an old address book from the bottom drawer of his desk. He goes to the M's and hopes the number is still good. A woman answers. Vidor's heart quickens. Hello, this is King Vidor. I'm looking for Tony Moreno. The woman on the other end takes a moment before replying. Tony's dead, Mr. Vidor. He died 2 days ago. All Vidor can do is offer his condolences. He hangs up the phone. Defeated.
Change is a constant. That's a part of life. But these days, it feels like there's something new to grapple with every day. We may be adjusting to this new normal, but it's still stressful. And it's important to talk about it and seek support. Talkspace Online Therapy is here to give you that support because we all need it right now. Match with a licensed therapist from the convenience of your device, no matter where you are. Reach out to your therapist 24/7 from a phone or computer, and you'll hear back 5 days a week. The bottom line is that we all need to talk sometimes. Therapy has helped me immensely, and I know it can help you too. And Talkspace wants to give more of us the support we deserve at a price we can afford. As a listener of this podcast, you can get $100 off your first month on Talkspace. To match with your perfect therapist, go to Talkspace.com or download the app. Make sure to use the code Hollywood to get $100 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com, code Hollywood. Once you've had your fill of old Hollywood terror, Wondery has another kind of terror in the form of an unexpected jail sentence abroad. Hope in Darkness chronicles the harrowing experience of Josh Holt and his newlywed wife, Tammy. After their dream wedding, they spent the first part of their honeymoon in a Venezuelan paradise. But all that would change when they answered a knock at their suite's door. They were greeted by state police, cuffed, booked, and taken to prison where they would spend the next 2 years. Unfairly imprisoned for a crime they did not commit, the Holts would endure pain both physical and psychological. How do they find hope in darkness? Stick around after the episode to hear a trailer. Gibby waited patiently in a comfortable couch outside the office of Jesse Lasky, West Coast head of Famous Players Lasky Studio. Her heart was racing 1,000 miles a minute. She was dressed to the nines in a blue crepe dress with a white collar, white gloves, and a fashionable hat. It was September 1923, and Gibby was in trouble. Again. 2 months ago, Don Osborne got himself arrested in Springfield, Ohio, after he, Blackie, and Rose went back to shake down the banker for more cash. The idiots couldn't make $10,000 last longer than a few months. The feds had been crawling around the neighborhood ever since. Gibby managed to stay off their radar, but then she got in a tight spot herself. One of the married guys she and Don ripped off showed up at Gibby's apartment out of the blue with his angry wife. He read about Don in the paper and put 2 and 2 together. The couple told Gibby they wanted their money back. If she refused, they were going to tell the cops what they knew about the blackmail gang. And they knew plenty. The cops would easily link Gibby to Dawn Osborne. If that happened, she was toast. That's how she ended up here at Famous Players Lasky. She had nowhere else to go. It was a huge gamble, but she was desperate. Finally, she was led into his office. Lasky leaned on the edge of his grand desk. He didn't ask her to sit down or even greet her before running a hand through his hair and saying, "You have 5 minutes." Gibby got straight to it. She was in a bind. If she couldn't come up with some money, it was all going to hit the papers. Lasky almost growled. "You were supposed to keep your nose clean. That was the deal. We're not a charity." Gibby tried a different tack. "A girl's gotta eat. I just need a job and maybe a little spending money." Lasky held up his hand. He gave her the name of a casting person. "Call him." "Oh, thank you," she beamed. "Don't come back," he said. Gibby dodged another catastrophe. Or so she thought. What Gibby didn't know was that her fraud victim had already contacted the authorities, and her name was about to get linked to Osborne and the blackmail gang. At that moment, an FBI agent across town was reading the dispatches from the Ohio police. In one of the pages, Hollywood actress Patricia Palmer was declared a person of interest in the case. The agent immediately recognized the name. He'd seen it in Dawn Osborne's file. Patricia Palmer owned the house Osborne was renting, and she lived a few doors down from him on Beechwood Drive. He grabbed his coat and headed out. He had a suspect to bring in.
King Vito steers his red Thunderbird west along Sunset Boulevard and then through Santa Monica to Adelaide Drive. He navigates through the steep winding road to a red brick house. It's the summer of 1967. Mary Miles Minter is still alive, and he has come to ask her if she murdered William Desmond Taylor. He is at the end of a line of sorts. He's gone down his list of the living and hit the high points. He was too late for Tony Moreno and Doug McLean. Whatever Moreno was trying to warn Vito about went to the grave with him. He's managed to track down the last living cops, but the key investigators were gone. All he got were patchy memories and a lot of speculation. It was up to Vito to put all the pieces together, and so he was at the door of the former ingenue, star of the stage and screen, Mary Miles Minter. She was the youngest person in the saga. Vito thinks she could outlive them all. He rings the bell and waits. After a moment, he hears a voice from upstairs. A window opens and a face appears asking if he's King Vito. He immediately recognizes the voice even though it's been 50 years since Vito last saw Minter in the flesh, when he was starting out as an actor and had a small role in one of her films. She takes a long time to open the door, leaving Vito to wait and wonder. He's not sure what to expect. Finally, he can hear her on the other side of the door, unlatching what sounds to him like several locks. Vito is shocked at her appearance. She greets him. "King, dear boy," as if they were living in 1917. He has always pictured Minter as she was back then. The ivory skin, the blonde curls, the bluer-than-blue eyes. Looking at her now, it's as if she has died and been replaced by a whole other person. He'd heard rumors she gained some weight when she left acting, but now Minter is morbidly obese. She invites him inside, and Vito has to squint to see anything. The large foyer is as dark as a crypt, stale and lifeless. She leads him to her living room and sits on a love seat across from him. The furniture is vintage 1920s. Layers of dust cover everything. She asks him if he's still making westerns. He notes her voice is still high-pitched, almost like a child's, but now it is tinged with an accent that is vaguely British. She seems distant, as if her mind's not present. The whole scene feels so incredibly weird and awkward that Vito wants to leave. She makes small talk about herself and her career as a child actress. She mentions her sister Margaret, saying she's dead now. He asks her if she remembers the film they made together, when he was just an actor starting out. She says she does, and then suddenly changes the subject. She offers him cake and cider. He declines, but she gets up to fetch it anyway. When she returns, she announces that the help has the day off. She puts the tray on the table with 2 slices of Black Forest cake and glasses of apple cider. Vito watches Minter carefully. To him, her motions seem robot-like, as if she has no more control of them than he does. She doesn't look at him, but seems to focus on something behind him or in the distance. He sticks his toe in the water. "I'm making a new picture. About the old days. About Bill Taylor." He waits for her response, but instead of answering, she asks him if he would like to hear her poetry. She returns with a stack of papers and reads from them. He finds them incomprehensible. He tries again to get her to focus on the old days. Then she asks him if he knows she was the very last person to see Taylor alive. Vito looks up, but then Minter repeats the story of her visit to the funeral home. He blurts out, "Do you know who killed him, Mary?" She insists, as she did years earlier, that she was reading to her family by the fire. She raises her voice, defiant. No, you don't know." Minter stands up and starts pacing the room, crying. Her hands are shaking. Vito realizes this woman is not stable, even if she tells him everything he wants to hear. How could he tell the difference from what was fantasy and what was reality? He notices the pages of poetry on the table, sees the poem she has just read was written by Charlotte Shelby. He shuffles through the pages. All are authored by Charlotte. He remembers hearing rumors that Charlotte is still alive. She would be 89. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Vito looks up. Could she be in this house right now? Minter rips the poems from his hands. "My mother killed everything I ever loved." Her face is streaked with tears. Vito doesn't know what to say or do. But he realizes that what he has come here for, he isn't ever going to get. He walks out of the room and out of the red brick house, never once looking back. In his heart, he knows the truth. He knows who killed William Desmond Taylor.
Gibby Gibson was arrested by federal agents on November 2, 1923, and charged with violating Section 145 of the Federal Criminal Code, extortion. Back in Cincinnati, Don Osborne and Rose Putnam would soon be sentenced. When word got back to them that Gibby's arrest was imminent, they changed their pleas to guilty. They were afraid Gibby might offer evidence of their crimes to get out of hers. The only person who got away was Blackie Madsen. During the interrogation by the feds, Gibby gave them as much guff as they gave her, yet she was careful. Gibby wouldn't admit a thing, but she couldn't afford the $2,500 bail. Alone and broke in the holding cell of the downtown courthouse, Gibby realized bitterly she had no way out. But at that moment, one of the guards walked up to the cell, jangling his set of door keys. He called her name. "What now?" "You're free to go," he said. "Your bail's been posted." Gibby had no idea who covered her bail. At the desk, they informed her it was done anonymously. But the surprises didn't stop there. Gibby's low-rent lawyer told her that whoever paid for the bail also got her one of the best attorneys in the state. His name was Frank Dominguez. Gibby, of course, knew Frank because he represented her in the Little Tokyo trial. But the rest of the country had gotten to know him as the man who got a jury to exonerate Fatty Arbuckle a year earlier. Dominguez was a rich man's lawyer, and he had very close ties to the movie colony's movers and shakers. Gibby wondered if one of her old contacts had sent him to her. Dominguez demanded the feds free this poor young actress caught up in the nefarious doings of other people. And yet, the feds weren't ready to back down. The case against Gibby was too strong. But barely 4 days later, on November 5, 1923, the federal prosecutors announced they had a change of heart. It was a spectacular turn of events. They dropped all charges against Gibby, citing good public policy not to prosecute. Gibby was free to go and walked out into the bright Los Angeles afternoon. In a few weeks, she would have some fresh headshots printed. It's a ritual she would repeat many times in the next decade, until she finally gave up completely. The rest of her career would consist of a few uncredited bit parts in Al Christie's low-rent slapstick comedies. His studio on the corner of Sunset Boulevard and Gower Street had earned the dubious nickname of the Corner of Last Hope. How fitting that this was the studio where Gibby's Hollywood dreams would go to die.
King Vidor parks his Thunderbird on Ocean Boulevard in Santa Monica, just north of the famous fishing pier. It's late afternoon and the air is still and quiet. The vast expanse of sky and sea has always made him feel small in the scheme of things. Today, that feeling has never been stronger. He knows what he has to do. Back in his office, he cleans up all the papers and files that he's accumulated in the past few months. He's learned so much and yet gained very little clarity. William Desmond Taylor certainly deserves better than to be a cold case in the LAPD police files. But Vidor cannot think of one other reason to open this particular Pandora's box for public consumption. So he places everything in a large storage box. He pries up a floorboard, putting the box and its contents inside. Then Vidor carefully nails the board back down. Perhaps he thinks, some secrets are best left to the whispers of the dead.
Ray Long knew something was wrong as soon as he arrived at his parents' house on Glen Oak Street in Hollywood's Beechwood Canyon neighborhood. It was Wednesday, October 21st, 1964, just past 4 p.m., on a warm Southern California afternoon. As he pulled up to the curb, Long saw several of his neighbors rushing into the house next door. He knew the older woman who lived there. Her name was Mrs. Lewis. His mother had befriended her over the 15 years she lived there and learned her husband had been an oil company executive who had been killed during the early stages of World War II. Mrs. Lewis subsisted on his pension. She didn't have any visitors or even a car and rarely left her home. Her only companion outside of his mother was a cat named Raja. Inside the house, Long found a startling scene. The old woman was on the floor of her kitchen, his mother bent over her tiny, frail frame. She was obviously in a great deal of pain. Long's mother said Mrs. Lewis had suffered a heart attack. An ambulance was on the way. The home was cluttered and unkempt. There was nothing personal that offered any insight into the long life the woman had led. Long knelt beside her. She was waving her hands as if trying to grab at something that wasn't there. She managed to spit out the words. "A priest. I need a priest. I want to confess my sins." Long attempted to comfort her, but she was inconsolable. He bent down close to hear her words. She said, "I used to be a silent film actress, and I killed a man. His name was William Desmond Taylor." The paramedics arrived and took over. Mrs. Lewis was loaded on a stretcher and rushed to Sunset Boulevard Hospital. At 5:20 p.m., Mrs. Lewis, once known as Margaret Gibby Gibson, was pronounced dead. On the final episode of Murder in Hollywoodland, I talked to our consultant for this series, William J. Mann, author of Tinseltown, Murder, Morphine, and Madness at the Dawn of Hollywood. He studied the case extensively and gives additional insight into Hollywood in the 1910s. He'll also share who he thinks murdered William Desmond Taylor. This was episode 6 of 6 of Murder in Hollywoodland from Hollywood and Crime. If you like what you've heard, be sure to tell your friends and fans of true crime. We're counting on you to help us spread the word. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Wondery app, or wherever you're listening right now. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app to listen ad-free. In the episode notes, you'll find some links and offers from our sponsors. Please support them. Another way you can support the show is by filling out a small survey at Wondery.com/survey. We use many resources when researching our story. We highly recommend visiting Bruce Long's Taylorology website, one of the most extensive collections of details of the murder and suspects. For this episode, we also utilized Sidney D. Kirkpatrick's book, A Cast of Killers. Murder in Hollywoodland was written by Elizabeth Cosin and produced and edited by Laura Donna Palavoda. Additional editing assistance by Leah Sutherland. Sound design by Kyle Randall. Audio assistance by Sergio Enriquez. Additional audio editing by Marcelino Villalpando. Our consultant is William J. Mann. His book, Tinseltown, Murder, Morphine, and Madness at the Dawn of Hollywood, has a lot more amazing stories about Hollywood and the way the studios operated in the silent era. Executive producers are Marshall Louis, Stephanie Jens, and Hernan Lopez, or Wondery. You're about to hear a preview of Hope in Darkness from Wondery. While you're listening, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or listen ad-free in the Wondery app.
We heard that dreadful sound. Boom, boom, boom. Police officers coming to the door.
June 30th, 2016. Joshua Holt, an American citizen, is asleep next to his wife of just 2 weeks, Tamara, in their apartment in Caracas, Venezuela.
And I wake up to just a gun being shoved onto my foot. I look up and there was an AK-47 just pointed right in my face. I'm thinking, whoa, what's going on?
Josh and Tammy don't know it yet, but they are about to become hostages of the Venezuelan government. They will spend most of the next 2 years in one of the country's most notorious prisons, El Alacuite. But in that moment, all they know is that something very strange is going down.
They said, you need to give us your phone and get ready because you're coming with us.
I'm Becky Bruce, and this is Hope in Darkness, The Knock at the Door. Over the course of this podcast, you'll hear Josh Holt tell, in his own words, what it was like to be locked up abroad on false charges for nearly 2 years.
A Utah family says their son is sitting in a Venezuelan jail after they say he was framed for being a U.S. spy.
Entre los capturados figuran el ciudadano norteamericano Joshua Anthony Hall.
Maduro wants to talk to somebody. He wants to see if he can have a better relationship with the United States.
I need the help of my people to come and get me and my wife.
If I could change places with him, I would. If I could go there, I would.
We'll address human rights violations, abuse, violence, and even torture. We'll also try to make sense out of the complicated relationship between the U.S. and Venezuela that led up to the Holt's arrest. For now, we go back to the beginning to understand how Josh and Tammy became pawns in an international game. Venezuela was about the farthest thing from Josh Holt's mind, growing up in a suburb of Salt Lake City, Utah. His dad, Jason, says his personality was evident from the start.
Josh was a funny kid. One story, he was standing on top of a 6-foot picket fence, and standing on the top rail, went to jump over, caught his foot on the top of it, fell face down in the gravel, and we're all inside just watching him outside. He looks up, looks around, doesn't see anybody, just shakes his head, stood up and ran away. And he just didn't let stuff bother him.
He was always getting hurt, it seemed like.
Derek is Josh's older brother.
We were crazy, I guess. He was more crazy than I think.
But he's a good kid. Then he grew up.
He looked forward to becoming a police officer, or maybe even a pilot. Josh arrived in Caracas on June 11th, 2016.
And I've heard that Venezuela is just beautiful. And I was just really excited. I talked to my wife about all the different things that we were going to do while I was there, all the beaches that I was going to go to. Being from Utah, I've only seen so many beaches my whole entire life. And so that sounded great to me.
Venezuela is positioned atop South America, where the continent meets the Caribbean. Lush green mountains surround the city of Caracas, which is separated from the sea by just a short distance. Palm trees sway along the streets.
Caracas is famous for food, beach. Every time, every Sunday, every holiday, the people go to the beach.
If you've seen those Fast and Furious movies, it's kind of where you have those houses on a hill, and they're just kind of stacked on each other is what it kind of looks like. You can't see any of the hill at all. It's just straight houses. And they're all different colors, and so it is beautiful.
Now, no, but was a beautiful place.
The next morning, they headed out to the airport for their honeymoon.
So we get to the airport probably 7 o'clock in the morning, and our flight was leaving right around 10. But for some reason, they weren't allowing anyone onto the flight. So everyone was just sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally, someone comes and tells all of us that the plane was commandeered by the government because they said that they found drugs in the plane.
Josh and Tammy spent the entire first day of their honeymoon waiting around in an airport. Josh believes that set the stage for a very close call. They left for the honeymoon a day late, so they came back home a day late, too.
I remember we were going up the mountain, and I remember all of these motorcycle cops and jeeps and cars just coming down from the mountain. Like, there were a ton. There were over 100, 200 police officers.
It wasn't just one law enforcement group, Josh learned later. This was likely the OLP, roughly translated, the Operation for the Liberation of the People. OLP was launched in the summer of 2015 by President Nicolas Maduro to crack down on a wave of crime in the country. It's a joint effort involving military and police officials from multiple agencies. OLP is blamed for a number of human rights violations between 2015 and 2017, all reported by Human Rights Watch. Witnesses and victims complained about the use of force, people being arrested without cause, people being kicked out of their own homes, and executions carried out without due process in the court system.
And so at this time, I didn't know anything about this. And I was just like, wow, this is crazy. And my wife just goes, yeah, they do that sometimes. And so she didn't really think anything of it. I didn't really think anything of it. But thinking back to that, I'm thinking, wow, if we were there, if we didn't have that extra day that we just sat there in the airport for a whole day, we probably would have gotten taken that night. She woke me up in a dead sleep, and so my brain's not really processing. And I can just hear her saying, Joshua, the police are going to all the houses. And I'm not really understanding what's going on. I'm not really registering.
At this point, Josh was still the guy who hoped one day to become a police officer. The idea that the police were the enemy, even in another country, was a foreign concept to him.
About an hour later, finally, we heard that dreadful sound. Boom, boom, boom. Police officers come into the door.
They asked Tammy if there were any men inside. Yes, she said. Can we come in? Of course.
She goes to the door and she opens it up, and there are 2 police officers staring down. So they come in and they have their guns out and they're looking in every single room. They go and look at my daughters. They come into my room and there I was asleep on the bed. And I wake up to just a gun being shoved onto my foot. I look up and there was an AK-47 just pointed right in my face.
The situation was surreal.
We had another pound on the door. Boom, boom, boom. She goes and opens the door. As soon as she turns the doorknob, they just barge through the door. And it's not 2 police officers this time. It's not 3 or 4. It's upwards of 10 police officers. And they all come straight to me, right around me, circled up. They have their guns pointed at me. And the first thing that they say to me, you need to give us your phone and get ready because you're coming with us.